Jesus laid bare and upset Jesus. If Jesus were to come from his time into ours, he would surely be upset to see that so many of his cherished expectations of the future, glorious expectations he had thought would take place within the lifetime of his own generation, still remain unfulfilled. Surely Jesus would find this terribly disappointing and would feel compelled to say so. But there's another matter I think he'd also find disturbing and would feel compelled to speak about it too. In conversations with people of our time, Jesus would surely be surprised to hear many of them say things about him which simply are not true, and he would ask them where they got that information. And upon being told, "We read these things about you in a book we call the New Testament, and especially in 4 writings in it we call Gospels." Upon hearing that, Jesus would surely want to read those 4 Gospels so that he could ascertain for himself their accuracy or lack of it regarding him. And only after doing that, I think, would he be willing to continue talking with us about himself. Let's now try to imagine what would happen if Jesus, after being given Aramaic translations of those 4 Gospels, and after having had ample time to study and consider them, let's try to imagine what Jesus would feel compelled to say to us regarding what those 4 Gospels say about him. Jesus critiques the Gospels. It may seem strange to say that Jesus would be critical of the Gospels, but I think he would feel compelled to be, because as Jesus read through those Gospels, he would see that only certain portions of them, portions that must have been written early, accurately reflect the situation of his youthful life in Nazareth and so much more besides. He would see that only those earlier gospel portions reveal how normal a life he had lived in Nazareth up until the event that changed his life entirely. He would also see that only those earlier gospel portions make clear how difficult it was for everyone, for his own family, for his own disciples, for his Nazareth neighbors, for the prophet John the Baptist, for the large crowds who were attracted to him, how difficult it was for any of them to come to believe what he himself had been caused to believe about himself. How difficult it was for any of them to come to believe what he himself had been caused to believe about himself. Yes, and how difficult a struggle it had been, even for him, to accept that realization. Indeed, I think Jesus would feel compelled to tell us something like this, something like this. If only it had been as easy for me as the Gospels of Matthew and Luke make it seem. If only angels had really announced to my parents ahead of my birth exactly who and what I was to be, or as the Gospels of Luke and John suppose, if only John the Baptist had really been my kinsman and had known and openly announced from the beginning who and what I was, or as the Gospel of John declares, if only I myself had known even before my birth who and what I was, if all of that or any of that had happened and were true, it would have been so much easier for me. But none of that reflects what really happened. None of it reflects the uncertainties and struggles I had to undergo until the day that changed my life entirely. The day when I decisively was told who and what I was. Nor does any of it reflect the even more difficult struggles I went through after that day. At this point, I think we would want to ask Jesus to tell us what really happened, to tell us about his uncertainties and struggles before that day that changed his life so entirely, and to tell us about the even more difficult struggles he went through after that day. What if Jesus himself were to tell us about himself and about his struggles? After making a careful examination of the Gospels, I think Jesus would agree with many modern scholars that the Gospel of Mark is the most factual of the four Gospels. Factual in the sense that the author of Mark drew upon some very early traditions about Jesus, traditions which the later Gospel authors chose to alter or even to omit because they did not fit in well with the church's later beliefs. For example, the authors of both Matthew and Luke completely omitted the Markan tradition that when Jesus began his ministry, his own family thought he had lost his mind. His mother and brothers went out to try to seize him and bring him home with them. But Jesus refused, insisting that his real family now consisted only of those who heard and accepted his message. And later, when he returned to teach and heal in Nazareth, he met with such rejection there that he himself complained that he did not receive honor even in his own town or among his own kin or in his own house, not even in his own home. It's not difficult to see why the later authors of Matthew and Luke chose to omit or change all this, for it doesn't fit in well with the stories of angels who, before and at Jesus' birth, made clear to his parents and to others exactly who and what he was to be. I think Jesus would also agree with numerous modern scholars that many of the statements attributed to him in the parallel Greek passages of Matthew and Luke reflect things he really did say in Aramaic. And I think he would agree that all such early sources of information in Mark, in the Matthew-Luke parallels, and in any other gospel passages that fit in well and do not contradict them, I think Jesus would agree that these earliest gospel traditions often provide reliable information, sometimes even historical bedrock, concerning things he actually said and did, and concerning his actual struggles. I'm now going to attempt something very audacious. I'm going to try to tell the story of Jesus as we might have heard it directly from him, if he really had come into our time and told us his own story, complete with his own struggles. And I'm going to attempt to do that simply and directly, without the usual heaped up scholarly arguments and defenses that clutter up, complicate, and weigh down so many historical studies of Jesus. I don't mean to say that my presentation will not be based on sound scholarship. Indeed, I think it's based on some of the very best historical Jesus scholarship now available to us. It's only that I want to try to make the story easier to follow and perhaps a little more interesting. Now, I know that's presumptuous and questionable, even dangerous. And I also know that all historical studies of Jesus ultimately end in failure. But that's what I intend to try to do. So let's continue by considering, did Jesus really struggle? That's the next section of this work in progress, which I'm hoping to continue in Jesus Laid Bare, Part 3. My name is Jim Boswell, and I approve this message.